Hello gang, Tattooed Biker here with you, and tonight I've got 4 strange and unexplained true stories. And these reports involving cryptid creatures and bizarre encounters were emailed to me from the people who experienced them firsthand. So if you enjoy this kind of content, then give the like button a frisky nudge. Subscribe if you haven't already, and then grab your boots because, well, it's time to ride. All right. First up tonight, a new owner of an old house was referred to me by a mutual acquaintance just so she could share a story. Now, her email and the story that it contained, well, is honestly one of the more disturbing ones that I've ever received. She writes,
Dear Tattooed Biker, a mutual acquaintance showed me your channel and gave me your email so that I could share my story. I just need to get what happened off my chest. You see, last month, my husband and I finally bought our dream house. It's on the edge of a large forest, and I love it. It's a little paradise, hidden by the large pine trees that grow on the premises. I honestly don't know where my backyard ends and the forest starts. When I lie in bed at night, I let the sounds of the forest sing me to sleep. I feel truly at peace. This house is everything I've ever dreamed of. I'm a musician, and I usually work from home, so for me the transition out of New York City and into the country wasn't too big. My husband, however, had to quit his job. He gave notice last week and still has 1 week to go. We had to leave our old apartment a few days ago, so for the time being he's staying with a friend while I've already moved to our new house. This week it would be just me and our 2 dogs. Now, this situation by itself isn't for the faint-hearted, and the woods can be scary, especially at night, and it gets pretty lonely out here. But, as fate will have it, this week some strange things have started to happen. It all started on Sunday, as I was unpacking boxes of our books and CDs when, by accident, I opened a box of Christmas decorations. My husband and I had decided that for our unused stuff to be stored in the basement, as it was just a cement hole anyway. A cold, windowless room not much bigger than a walk-in closet. I walked down the wooden stairs and dropped the box in a corner when I noticed there was a small hatch on the wall under the staircase. Initially, I was really excited as I thought it was a safe or something. But then I noticed that there was only a latch on it to lock it from the outside. I wondered if it could be a door, but the opening was quite narrow. A small person, such as myself, could maybe fit, but say my husband would have trouble getting through. Stepping closer, I noticed a small plaque that said, "Keep shut at all times." Well, I opened it anyway. There really wasn't anything to see, though. It was really dark inside, and the light from the basement was too dim to light it at all. From inside came a clicking or snapping kind of noise. Not quite rhythmic, but frequent enough that I thought that maybe it was some type of machine. I didn't dare stick my head or limbs in for fear of getting electrocuted or cut, so I shut the hatch and resolved to take a look when I'd unpacked my flashlight. Over the following days, things got pretty weird. On Monday, the dogs were going nuts. As soon as the first one stopped barking, then the other would start up. They were just barking into nothing. Dark corners or the ceilings or rooms that weren't lit. On Tuesday, the dogs fortunately had quieted down, but, however, that night, while making dinner in the kitchen, I heard the same clicking that had come from the space behind the hatch. It originated from the corner of the living room, which was only barely illuminated by the light from the kitchen. I approached quietly, but when I was about to flip the switch, one of the dogs flew past me and barked at whatever it was that had made the noise, and the noise stopped. I turned on the light, but nothing was there, and when I called my husband that night, I told him that I thought we had an infestation of some sort. Then at night, things really ramped up. I was in bed, sleeping soundly, when I woke up from one of the dogs scratching the door from outside the bedroom. I cringed as I heard its nails drag across the fresh paint, but I didn't let it in. and almost immediately I drifted back to sleep. That morning, one of the dogs decided to pull me out of slumber by aggressively licking my face. I groggily pushed it off and then pulled the sheets up over my head when I remembered the scratching. I cursed and hastily got up to check if he had ruined the door, but then I noticed that both dogs were in my bedroom. Whatever had scratched the door last night wasn't one of the dogs. Oh, and it did ruin the door, by the way. Also, when I went down for breakfast, I noticed the bowl of dog food was completely empty, even though I just refilled it the night before. When I called my husband that evening, I told him that I thought we had an infestation of something big. Now, you might think that I would have been scared at this point, but I hadn't quite connected the dots. And besides, we live in an old house, so I figured anything was possible. After calling my husband, I sat down with a book and a glass of wine out on the porch. Now, despite it being December, the weather this week was quite pleasant, and I love feeling the cold breeze across my cheek as I'm tucked under a warm blanket. I hadn't really noticed how exhausting this week had been for me, but not 10 minutes into reading, I fell asleep. It must have been past midnight when I woke up from the motion-activated lights in the backyard switching on. Half asleep, I turned to look, and what I saw shocked me wide awake. About 30 feet away from me stood a tall, slender, humanoid figure. It was hunched over as it drank from the bird bath we had just put in the garden a few days ago. For a few seconds, I just sat there, frozen in fear watching this thing drink. The creature had long, thin limbs and its skin was pitch black. It also had a long, thin tail, like a shadow that just rose from the pavement and became a person. It looked emaciated. The bones were sticking out so far under its dry skin it looked like they were going to pop. And when it rose up, its face, God, that face will haunt me forever. It had clouded gray eyes that were laying way too deep in its skull. And it was looking right at me. For a second, I thought that was the end of me. But then, it just backed away into the darkness. As it sank into the shadows, it became immediately invisible. I heard the leaves rustle further into the woods, and it was gone. I locked myself and the dogs in the bathroom, and quietly cried until sunrise. I eventually gathered up the courage to get out. That was this morning. I called my husband and told him everything. He said he would come over ASAP and he should be there for dinner. I decided to unpack some more boxes today to try and take my mind off of it all. But while putting more boxes in the basement, to my horror, I discovered the hatch was all the way open. I definitely closed it on Sunday. I'm 100% sure. I must not have locked it. Whatever was in there, now it's out. And I just felt like I needed to tell somebody. Signed, Samantha.
I tried to contact Samantha via email for a follow-up. I didn't receive any response, although the mutual acquaintance confirmed to me that she did receive my request for more information. All I do know is that the couple moved out of the house, but no exact reason was given as for why. And now, strange activity is reported at Arrowhead Lake, Pennsylvania.
Hey TB, I thought that I'd write you. You see, something happened, and I still can't explain this. I was out in the mountains of Pennsylvania, in the Poconos, and this happened multiple times. I would be out in the woods and would hear knocking sounds on the trees around us at night. I would just brush it off as the wind, but then the sounds would get louder and closer, and then they started surrounding us in a circle. And then we heard screaming from the woods surrounding us. Not yelping, but in some kind of language that we couldn't understand. It was definitely insane. It sounded like people dying. It definitely wasn't coyotes. I've heard them many times, and this sounded, well, almost human. While the screaming and knocking kept going in circles, we would huddle near each other around the fire, looking at one another like, what is that? And then it would stop after about 20 minutes. When we were in our tent, sometimes we would hear it again and hide under the blankets. Sometimes we would even hear footsteps outside. Now, this was in an area, historically, that had a lot of Native American violence, so maybe that could be why. I'm just grasping at straws here because there was no way that we could explain it. Whenever we went to the same area, it would happen. The last time we were there, we ended up staying at my friend's cabin, and I really only stayed one night and day because 2 people had to leave and I didn't want to be alone with the last person there, whom I really didn't know all that well. They were kind of odd to say the least, and I didn't feel right without cell service or my own car out in the middle of nowhere with a stranger. Nothing out of the ordinary there, though. Just a campfire, some beers, grilled food, etc. This was in a different area than the above. No weird sounds that I could hear, even while venturing into the woods looking for them. But maybe someday I'll hear them again. I've talked to friends and family about this. Some of them suggested that we encountered a group of Bigfoot. One friend told me that they had experienced the same thing in the same area, near Arrowhead Lake. What are your thoughts? Signed, Ward.
Thanks for sharing that report, Ward. The Poconos are well known for a variety of unexplained activities and cryptid sightings. Bigfoot and cryptid canines have been reported from there in the past, as well as ghostly phenomena. Honestly, it seems possible to me that this was Bigfoot activity. And now, an Air Force military police officer's creepy encounter in Southern Oregon.
Dear Tattooed Biker, this took place in August of 2013 in the mountains of Southern Oregon. I am a United States Air Force Security Forces Airman, or military police. My girlfriend was at work, and as a sweltering hot day began to turn into thunderstorms, my buddy Nick, another military cop, and I decided to go explore some back roads and get out of the heat of town. Now, Southern Oregon is crisscrossed with logging roads, some actively used and many totally forgotten and grown over. Nick and I spent many of our days starting off on roads that we knew, then finding roads that we didn't know, driving for hours around the mountains, and eventually navigating back to the paved roads. On this particular day, with storm clouds building over the mountains, we set off on a road that we had never been on and began to drive into the mountains. After driving for around an hour, we hadn't seen or heard any signs of other people. We rounded a bend in the thick fir woods and emerged in a meadow that was totally surrounded by thick aspen groves. The meadow was completely flat and eerily still. We both noticed the strange stillness almost immediately. No birds, hardly any insect noise, no squirrels, and certainly no other people. On the far side of this meadow, right at the edge of the tree line, there was a picnic table. Now, this table was very odd, however. It was painted in a bright orange. It was much larger than a typical picnic table in a park. Remarking on this, Nick drove through the meadow to get a closer look. I remember being really apprehensive as we approached. The whole scenario was exceptionally strange. The overall silence of this grove was unsettling. And also, it was nearly impossible to see into the trees very far because aspens grow extremely close together. When we parked by the table, I hopped out of the passenger seat of the truck to check it out. Now, I'm not very tall, only about 5'8". Regardless, this table was ridiculously oversized, practically unusable. The seats were nearly at my chest level, meaning I'd have to climb up to even sit on them. As I was looking at the table, Nick called me over to the truck, and I noticed that he was looking into the tree line. At first, I couldn't see what he was looking at, but then I noticed a splash of color that was completely out of place in the thick trees. I saw a one-man tent was set back in the woods, about 50 feet from this strange table. I had an initial feeling of dread, and I felt certain that there was someone in that tent. And if we could see the tent, then they could certainly see us. There were no campgrounds in this area, no people, and no main roads for miles. Surely someone camping so remotely would be, at the very least, a pretty strange person. However, as we observed the tent, we didn't see any movement or hear any sounds coming from it. Nick suggested I call out, but I didn't want to. Eventually I did. I said, "Hey, anyone in there?" There was no reply. Now feeling completely on edge, Nick and I thought about driving away and just leaving the strange area, but we began to fear the worst. What if there was a body in that tent? What if somebody had gotten kidnapped or someone needed help? Foolish, I know, but we thought it all the same. After a bit of debate, we decided to have Nick turn the truck around to drive away from the camp. Should we need to leave in a hurry, he would be waiting behind the wheel. With my heart pounding, I started walking through the trees towards this tent. I was totally keyed up with my senses on full alert, and when I reached the campsite, several things struck me as odd. Backpacks were scattered all over. No fire had been built and no wood collected. The tent was literally full of these backpacks and women's clothing. Full of dread, I turned to leave and tell Nick what I'd seen. As I left, I heard Nick start yelling, "Let's go! Let's get the hell out of here!" Not knowing why he was yelling, I ran back to the truck. When I broke from the trees, I saw a beat-up old Ford Taurus on the road, blocking us from leaving the meadow. I immediately leapt into the passenger seat and Nick floored the gas pedal. The car appeared to be occupied by 2 men. A third person was lying against the window in the back. As we drove across the meadow, the driver attempted to block us from the road, but Nick drove around them and accelerated the way we had come from. I looked back and I saw the car attempting to turn around on the narrow road. Nick drove like a madman, and though I was honestly terrified that they would catch up, we eventually hit the highway without seeing the car again. I still don't know if the person in the back was male or female. I called the state police and they promised to send a trooper out to check out the scene. However, I received a call the next day from a trooper stating that the campsite, the backpacks, and the women's clothing were all gone. Though he could tell that people had been in the area, the strange table was still by the thick aspen grove. I haven't returned to that area, and I don't intend to. Signed, Ronnie.
Thanks, Ronnie. I appreciate you sharing your story. I honestly can't provide any answers. Maybe the viewers can share their theories in the comment section. And now finally, a man recalls when he discovers that his grandfather was keeping a secret in North Carolina.
Dear TB, my family has lived in Jackson County, North Carolina for as long as anyone can remember. We are Cherokee, and there are stories of stone men or hairy savages seen by our people historically throughout the Qualla boundary. I have a story told to me by my grandfather when I was a boy. Grandpa Parker talked about the large garden and cornfields that his parents maintained. They would grow heirloom bean and tomato varieties that came from hundreds of years in Cherokee culture. They also kept a few field animals, but at the time they didn't raise livestock. After a while, his parents decided that they would try raising chickens. So he helped his father build a large chicken house and another small barn that would be used as a workshop. Everything went well, and after a few years, their flock of egg-laying hens was prospering. His father was also a very good handyman and fixed equipment for other farmers in the area. One day, just before the harvest season, Grandpa Parker and his father went hunting in the woods west of the farm. Their main quarry was squirrel that day, and as they reached their regular spot along a ridge thick with hickory trees, his father suddenly looked worried. They rarely talked or made any noise while in the woods, but his father started to whistle in a long, sustained tone. They sat quietly on the boulder for a few minutes until his father once again let out this long whistle. "We need to move," his father abruptly said. So they got up and started to briskly walk on the trail back towards the farm. When they reached the end of the woods, they heard a loud whistle coming from the direction where they had came from. They cut through the cornfield quickly and reached the workshop, Grandpa Parker looking worried. His father didn't say anything, just directing him to stay with him. His mother was in the garden working when his father shouted out to her to go in the house. They all met at the door by the kitchen and went inside. He and his father sat at the table while his mother made coffee. "Why did we leave the woods?" His father looked at him and asked if he had ever heard anyone talk about the hairy man. Grandpa Parker told him that he had not, and he was scared now. "My grandfather said that the hairy man was a tall, hairy, human-like creature that would migrate to different locations along the mountains, following the food sources. When they were in the woods, he noticed that there were no birds or other natural sounds as they approached the ridge. He said that he noticed something large in the hollow, much larger than a black bear and walking like a man. He whistled, hoping it would just move on, but he didn't notice it move or make any sound. From his experience, that was an indication that it was time to leave, because the bear man or hairy man was staying put. The return whistle they heard was a warning to stay out of the woods. When my great-grandfather was younger, a woman and her young boy went missing in the woodland in nearby Swain County, North Carolina. People had seen a hairy man in the area and suspected that it was responsible for the disappearance. There had been other disappearances previous to that. No remains were ever found. The next day, his father decided to start harvesting corn. This year, a large patch of cornfield nearest the woods was left unharvested. His mother also left several baskets of potatoes at the edge of the woods that winter. They didn't want any problems from the hairy man, especially since he was known to raid chicken houses. One evening, while he and his father were working out in the shop, they heard a long whistle coming from the woods. His father smiled and said, "Don't mind that. Hairy man is just saying thank you." The next spring, they went once again into the woods to hunt. The hairy man had moved on. Signed, John.
Thanks, John, for sharing that. Well, that's all the true strange encounters and cryptid report stories that I have for you this evening. As always, I'm anxious to read your thoughts and theories down in the comments below, but please keep it respectful to the witnesses. And if you have a strange experience or an unexplained encounter that you want to share, just send it to the email address in the description and, well, your story may just wind up in a future video. Anyways, thank you so very much for taking this strange ride with me tonight. I really appreciate you. And until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, stay safe, and I'll be seeing you on down the road a ways. Biker out.